We're going to return with our next committee meeting, which is Lake Whatcom Reservoir and Natural Resources, and Councilmember Dan Hamill is the chair.
Thank you, Pinky. I'm joined today by Councilmembers Borneman and Knutson. We have 4 items before us today. The first item is a presentation to Council regarding the Squalicum Creek Reroute Project Phase 1 and Phase 2.
Excellent. Thank you. Ted Carlson, Public Works Department. We wanted to take this opportunity to update Council on where we're at with the Squalicum corridor improvements. As the agenda bill read, we are largely complete with Phase 1 and Phase 2. That goes along with the improvements that we made on James Street Bridge a few years ago. And you'll be getting a briefing, I think, from Parks shortly about where they're at on the Bay to Baker Trail. So all of these projects that are working together, as well as the Orchard Street undercrossing in this little area. So we're making some excellent progress, and the Squalicum Phase 1 and 2 turned out really, really well. So we wanted to take an opportunity to share that with Council. And with that, I'll turn it over to Renee, and she'll go through a brief presentation.
Hi, Renee LaCroix, Public Works. As Ted was saying, we finished up Squalicum Phases 1 and 2, and I pulled up a map of the area just to make sure we're all talking about the same place. This is James Street right here. This is the James Street Bridge that was replaced by Public Works in 2015, 2014, 2015. This is I-5, and this is Sunset Pond and Bug Lake. And when we talk about Squalicum Phases 1 and 2, we talk about, this is Phase 1 starting here at the outlet of Bug Lake going to James Street. That's Phase 1. And Phase 2 is from James Street over to Iron Gate. And the difference in the phases is simply funding packages. We were able to pull in $3.9 million in grants and loans from the Department of Ecology for all phases combined. But for the funding sources, we always refer to them by Phase 1 and 2. And we had Trimax Construction for this project. They did a fabulous job. We had a great city engineer, Craig Mueller, who's in the audience to answer any questions you have, who made the whole job look easy. And we had one of our biologists, Sarah Brooke Benjamin, really hands-on during the construction to make sure all the things related to the fish and the isolation and the environment were well taken care of during the construction. The project ended up being about $1 million under budget, which is always nice when that happens. And as part of the project, we worked with EJ Visuals to create a video to tell the public about the project and why it happens and why we did it. So I'm going to show you that video. And I guess I should caveat it. I think EJ Visuals does a great job because they can take somebody like me who has no experience being on camera and make it look decent. So big thank you to them. Hi, I'm Renee LaCroix with the City of Bellingham's Natural Resources Division of Public Works. This fall, salmon migrating up Squalicum Creek will swim through a new stream channel with access to upstream tributaries and important fish habitat that has been blocked for over 50 years. The new channel is part of a project to reroute nearly a mile of Squalicum Creek, improving water quality and fish habitat for our community. Squalicum Creek was once considered prime spawning habitat for important fish species like salmon, steelhead, and coastal cutthroat trout. However, as the area developed, the creek was diverted from its natural stream channel and into 2 shallow water bodies known locally as Sunset Pond and Bug Lake. These ponds originated during the 1960s when the waters of the creek entered 2 gravel borrow pits left over from the construction of Interstate 5. In the ponds, stagnant conditions led to an unhealthy increase in water temperature, low levels of dissolved oxygen, and an increase in fecal coliform bacteria. Today, a project by Bellingham Public Works Natural Resources has returned Squalicum Creek to its own stream channel to improve water quality conditions. Instead of traveling through the pond, the creek now runs roughly parallel to the pond through its new stream channel until it reaches the James Street Bridge built by the City of Bellingham in 2015. The creek flows under the bridge and continues west, traveling through its newly restored channel until it reaches Interstate 5. Where it passes under I-5 through a new 3-sided box culvert built by the Washington Department of Transportation. Both the bridge at James Street and the I-5 culvert are designed to support fish migration and replace old culverts that used to prevent fish from moving upstream. As part of the project, large wooded debris has been added to the stream channel to create stable habitat. These trunks and root wads mimic the trees that would naturally fall into a mature stream. The logs create pools for salmon and other fish to rest and find shade. In addition, they provide stream bank stability until the surrounding vegetation matures enough to create a naturally balanced system. Now that the in-stream work is done, the city will begin the process of planting native trees and shrubs along the new streamside habitat. Community work parties will be co-hosted by Bellingham Public Works, Parks, and the Nooksack Salmon Enhancement Association. The City of Bellingham's Washington Conservation Corps crew will continue planting throughout the year, as well as controlling invasive species for the next decade or until the native vegetation becomes well established. The rerouting of Squalicum Creek not only benefits fish, but supports birds, amphibians, and other wildlife, while making a significant step towards returning healthy water quality to Squalicum Creek. As the vegetation matures, the area will develop into an exciting urban fish and wildlife viewing area, ideal for bird watchers and day hikers. The project is being closely coordinated with the development of the Beta Baker Trail, which will provide viewpoints into the new creek upon its completion, scheduled for the fall of 2016. Currently, the best place to view the new stream channel is from the new James Street Bridge near Sunset Pond Park. If you do see salmon in the creek, it's important to give them space. Be sure not to disturb the salmon or enter the creek. Also, please keep dogs on a leash and out of the creek so they don't disturb the gravel beds where salmon lay their eggs. Sunset Pond will continue to receive water directly from its own drainage basin, and Sunset Pond Park will remain open as a public park and a gateway to future trails. Construction costs to reroute Squalicum Creek were $1.9 million. Portions of the funding came from a Washington Department of Ecology Centennial Clean Water Grant and a low-interest loan as part of the State Clean Water Revolving Fund. The next phase of in-stream restoration on Squalicum Creek will address similar water quality issues associated with Bug Lake. Construction is anticipated around 2017. The completion of this phase of the Squalicum Creek reroute coincides with the annual return of our local salmon runs. With the removal of fish passage barriers, paired with immediate improvements to water quality, salmon may begin using the new creek channel as early as this fall, and for the first time in over 50 years, these fish will have access to spawning grounds in the upper watershed of Squalicum Creek. This is a project of the City of Bellingham's Public Works Natural Resources Division. For more information, visit www.cob.org/Squalicum. I'm happy.
Sure. Committee members, questions? Give me the lights.
That's a great video.
Yeah, council members, any questions, comments? Pinky.
Just a comment, for a project to go on this long and not receive any complaints is really amazing. So obviously you did a great job and everyone was very happy with the results. Thank you.
Michael.
I think this is really great work. It's been a while in coming. It seemed like, a couple of years ago that 2016 was a long ways away. And this is part of, I think, at least a trio, maybe more of projects. We just talked about daylighting of Patton Creek. About half of that is done, and there's, I think, tentative drawings for another extension if we ever get the money for that. There's Squalicum, I think we already did work on, and this. And I've seen, and for that matter, Whatcom, the middle reach of Whatcom Creek, very similar work, where what we've put in a more meandering system and the entire habitat around there, and it's surprising how within a number of years the area really fills in. It's going to be great.
Other comments? April.
I'm just thankful for all the coordination with all the different volunteer groups and giving people an opportunity, because I noticed even my children are involved in a wild Whatcom, and they did some fun projects on this, and they have this sense of ownership, which is really cool. So when we get by there, it's like, of course we have to have our dog leashed and you can't go down in there. It's important, I think, to have that. So I appreciate those opportunities for the city.
Great. All right, that item was for information only. Our next item is requesting authorization for the mayor to execute the grant and loan agreement between the City of Bellingham and the State of Washington Department of Ecology for the Squalicum Creek Reroute Water Quality and Biotic Integrity Improvements Phase 3 project.
Yes, thank you. So is a nice segue, our previous item into this one. Phase 3, which continues to work on Squalicum Creek through the Bug Lake area. And what's before the council, the first of 2 items, is a request to authorize the mayor to enter into the funding agreement with Department of Ecology to fund Phase 3. Again, like we did with Phase 1 and 2, it's a grant loan combination, $500,000 in grant, and then $822,000 in low-interest loan, although Ecology has agreed to forgive about $200,000 of the principal of the loan. So in essence, we're borrowing about $600,000 over 20 years at very low interest, about 2.4%. So good financing for a good project to continue the work along Squalicum Creek. Renee's here to answer any questions you may have about the project itself, but we're excited to continue the work.
Committee members?
Move approval.
Yep.
Okay. Any discussion, questions? Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, we'll take that recommendation to the full council this evening. Next item is appropriation of funds from the State of Washington Department of Ecology for the Squalicum Creek Reroute Water Quality and Biotic Integrity Project, or pardon me, Biotic Integrity Improvements Phase 3 project. This sounds very similar to what we
Yes.
just talked about.
Yes, it is. So this is step 2. This is council action to actually recognize the funding into the budget. So an ordinance before council to accept $1.3 million in revenue. That is the combination of grant and loan that we just talked about from Department of Ecology. And then we also acknowledge the expense in the budget ordinance that's before council. So a follow-up to your previous action.
Okay. Committee members?
Move approval.
Okay. Any further discussion, questions, council? Okay. Committee members, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, we'll take that to full council this evening. Last item is Bellingham Habitat Restoration Technical Assessment, and this is for information only. Ted Carlson's here to present.
Yes, thank you. And I'll quickly turn it over to Renee and Annalise to go through this in more detail. It's been quite a while since we've been before council on this particular topic, but late last year we finalized the Habitat Restoration Technical Assessment, and Annalise Burns, our Habitat and Restoration Manager, is here to give an update on that and answer any questions that you may have.
Hi, I'm Annalise Burns. Nice to see all of you. And we are pleased to present that this is the final document of the Habitat Restoration Technical Assessment. It's been many years in the making, and we're excited about how it can be used from here on out. So this is a presentation that's meant to give you the full overview, kind of where we came from, why we did what we did, and then how we did it, and then what it can be used for in the future. So to step back, what the purpose of this was to look at inventorying our habitats, assessing the current status of the habitats, its function, and then prioritizing actions that we can use to protect those habitats and improve them in the future. And there's 2 important components to this. And the first is that it was a citywide inventory, a citywide assessment. It's looking at concepts of watershed approach, where in the past people have looked kind of niche in different specific regions of the city, but this was taking a broader view. And I should mention that we say citywide, but there were 2 areas that were not assessed as part of this, and that was the Lake Whatcom watershed, which is managed and assessed under a different program, and then the marine shoreline, which was already assessed in a prior effort. And the second is that this is science-based. So it's taking hard science and really looking at how we're going to assess rather than judgment. So the planned vision is that it would help realize the city's legacies and strategic commitments, specifically the clean, safe drinking water and healthy environment, provide sound scientific information to inform our policy decisions, inform restoration and protection activities, so where and how we're doing it, facilitate improved communication and partnerships so that we can communicate why we're doing what we're doing and why we're doing it where we're doing it, in order to, or a second part of communicating it is that then that would create opportunities for leveraging additional funding, because we need to be able to explain to our funders why we're doing it and where we're doing it, and that helps us be able to gain their support and future funding. And finally, it also provides a foundation for a mitigation program. Some of you might have heard about the idea of a mitigation program for the City of Bellingham, specifically one called an in lieu fee program, and this is an instrumental foundation to moving forward on a concept like that. So the desired outcomes would be a prioritized list of actions. So list of actions of protection or restoration of our habitats. And that we would want to look at those actions and decide where to do them and how to do them relative to other city habitats. So we're looking at prioritizing across the city. This would be based on a prioritization based on future function rather than returning to a historical function. And that's really a way to say that we recognize we're in an urban environment. We're not going back to a pristine condition. We're just looking at how do we improve the functions with what we've got. And the third is action produced the greatest ecological benefit. So prioritizing it based on how do we get the best lift, the best benefit. And best or greatest ecological benefit would be defined by having multiple lift or being able to have multiple benefits across habitats with one action, if possible. And then also looking at protection and restoration, two different approaches for being able to get benefit. I just want to acknowledge there was a lot of people involved with this project. The city staff, it was headed project manager was Renee LaCroix. I was involved, and then we have another staff member, Sarah Brooke Benjamin, was also instrumental. This was done by a team of consultants, and my hats go off to their innovation and their dedication. This was a lot of effort, and it was also very cutting edge. There wasn't a lot of precursors, or there was no boilerplate that they could use. So this took a lot of work on their part of how to formulate this. So Environmental Science Associates, Northwest Ecological Services, and Veda Environmental. And then the funding was provided by the Department of Ecology, Centennial Clean Water Funds, as well as the City of Bellingham's Olympic Pipeline Settlement Funds. So an important thing to realize when we go through this effort is what kind of communication and guidance went into producing this document. We did City Council, Natural Resources Division did City Council presentations over several years. There was a big effort by a technical advisory group. So this was very key in our communication and outreach. We had 5 work sessions and meetings over a series of several years. And there were 10 individuals, or I suppose groups, that were represented on the technical advisory group, including Washington State Department of Ecology, City of Bellingham Parks, Parks and Recreation Advisory Group, Resources, Skagit Fishery Enhancement Group, Citizens, Western Washington University, North Cascades Audubon, and other City of Bellingham staff, including Natural Resources. To continue along with that, we also had a public open house where it was open to the general public. They were able to provide input and guidance in the very early stages of us embarking on this effort. So I'm going to walk you through the process of how we did what we did. And there's 2 stages to this process. The first one was a technical assessment process where we went through a series of steps, identifying habitat groups. So that's essentially what do we want to study? What are the habitats that we're interested in the city? Then we did an inventory. Where are they in the city? And then the functional assessment, how are they functioning now? What is our existing conditions? And that gave us an existing relative function. So across the city, what do we have relative to the other habitats in our city? The second step was a prioritization process. So once we know what we have, we then could embark on how do we prioritize what we do with them. And that went through a series of, again, 3 steps. So one was a preliminary prioritization, which in lay terms would just mean you're looking at the ecological factors. So environmentally, how would you prioritize where the best benefit would be. And then we used a second prioritization. You can think of it like a filter. We provided a filter that said, but how effective would those actions be, and how feasible are those actions? And then the third filter that we used was, ideally you would have one action and it would have multiple benefits. And so that was the third filter, was our comprehensive prioritization. Where could we get the biggest bang for our buck? And that, at the end of the process, gave us a list of actions where we can actually make a difference on the ground that would make the most action, biggest bang for the buck. So I'm going to walk you through those steps briefly so you can understand them a little bit more in detail. So to go to that first technical assessment stage, the first step was identifying habitat groups, and we identified 4: riverine, wetlands, meadow shrub, and forest. So those were what the habitats we are looking at. And just wanted to let you know that 3 of them, we had enough data to move all the way through the process. Again, this was a science-based assessment, so we did not have enough credible scientific information for meadow and shrub to bring it all the way through the process. So that one dropped out, you'll see in the end. And in the future, if we get more information, we could bring it all the way to fruition. The inventory was an inventory of 28 subwatersheds, all the subwatersheds throughout the city, with the 4 habitat groups, with the exception of marine and Lake Whatcom watershed, as I said. That's why Lake Whatcom watershed is grayed out. And then we did that functional assessment I mentioned. So here's just a schematic to show you how that works. The habitat group is on the far left. So for instance, we were talking about riverine. We're talking about a stream. What functions are we interested in? What does that stream function to do that benefits society as well as the environment? Once we've identified what functions we're interested in, we have to measure them somehow. If we're going to say how well it functions, we need to be able to measure it. So we would then identify measurements that would tell us how it's functioning. So we did this this exercise for each of the 4 habitat groups, and that's how we came up with our functional assessment. Now the prioritization was the second phase, the second line of process that I showed you in the earlier slide. And I'm going to go through a couple of items on this slide. So there were, I said, 28 subwatersheds that we looked at. 24 of them had habitats that needed assessing. We then when we went through the assessment, obviously they came out with different functions and different feasibility. And that's where we ended up placing them in tiers. So there's tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 subwatersheds. The tier 1 subwatershed are the watersheds that went all the way through the process, and they had the biggest bang for the buck. You could have multiple lift, and it was feasible, and it meant real ecological benefit. This was done for the riverine, the wetland, and the forest habitat groups. The second part of it is that we looked at both restoration actions that we could take as well as protection actions we can take. So the tier 1 had different subwatersheds that would rank high for all 3 prioritizations, and then it would tell you how they fell out for riverine and restoration, wetland and restoration, forest and restoration, and same thing with protection. So it gives you a lot of information about where to put the action and what action would be best and for which habitat. Tier 2 and Tier 3 were, as you imagine, if Tier 1 is the one that provided the multiple benefits, Tier 2 would provide some benefits. It was feasible, but maybe would be only for one habitat group. And Tier 3 would be something that maybe if you had a targeted goal, say water quality only, you could find something that would have benefit, but it wouldn't have that wide sweeping bang for the buck. So the Tier 1, let me go back one. The Tier 1 subwatersheds were then, we dug in deeper. Those were the ones that we really wanted to see what on the ground could happen. So we dug deeper and identified actual on-the-ground projects that could happen. So there were 9 sub-watersheds that ended up being in the Tier 1 group. And for each of those sub-watersheds, there was a map like this that was produced. And it would show actual projects that would have forest, meet the forest habitat group objectives. One was for wetlands and for riverine. And within each of those, they say, well, are you talking about restoration actions or are you talking about protection actions? And then it links that to an actual on-the-ground project that could happen. So for instance, for wetlands, if you were looking at protective actions, this scientific-based assessment says that SCWP1, which just means Squalicum Creek Wetland Protection 1, is a potential project. That happens to be Bug Lake. Good for us that the science-based assessment validates the project, which is you just heard about for Phase 3 of the Squalicum Creek reroute. And it then shows that this is linked, each one of these words on the map and the polygons is linked with a text in the document that describes what kind of actions and what kind of benefits would be expected. This then lets us explain to funders why we were why we are proposing to do a certain action, and what kind of outcomes we are expecting, and how does that fit within the larger context of the watershed. So what can it be used for? Well, first of all, it's already useful. I know lots of people that are interested in using this document. I personally have used it. Other people in our office have, to really assess, is what we're doing meeting that overall objective, and how does it, where should we be putting our efforts? The potential uses include selecting a type of action. What kind of action should we select for our goal? Where the selection of the location for the action, so where should we concentrate our efforts? Number 3, guiding planning decisions. So this can even be used in the planning department, for instance, or in the outside consultants when you're looking at land use and looking at making trade-offs for different types of land decisions. Number 4, it can inform the CAO and SMP updates, and it's actually already incorporated into the proposed CAO update as best available science. And finally, it can then form that foundation for a mitigation program, as I mentioned earlier. That concludes my presentation. There's a lot more detail, so if you have any questions and you're interested, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, Annalise. Committee members, questions? Council members, questions? April?
So for those that are at home or out there, like, this is the document. I was a little intimidated when I got it. I didn't know it was this long, but it's digestible. Like, I actually understood it, I think. Or
Thank you. We worked really hard.
Which I can imagine was really difficult. I guess I'm interested in how often will we go out and reevaluate, and then how do you work with so many groups that do so much volunteering of improving habitat? How do you coordinate that so you know that an improvement happens, so you don't have to wait 2 years before you redo this?
I think we can both answer that. As far as the volunteer groups, this is a document they can use too, and we already do quite a bit of coordination with this. As was mentioned in the video earlier, we do quite a bit of coordination with the Nooksack Salmon Enhancement Association and the Bellingham Parks Department. And so the idea of this whole document is to make it more transparent where our interests are and where we'll be focusing in the future, so that other people can factor that into their work plans as well. And the first question was?
Oh, I think
how often we're going to update it.
How often would you update, and then if they do it, do they come to you if groups do some of these things and tell you they've done it, or do they have to get permitted to do them? Or
that's a good question, and we could handle that a couple different ways. As far as updating it, I would guesstimate we would be on a 5 to 10 year cycle. I mean, this took a lot of staff resources, and it was, it was expensive to do something like this. So I would guesstimate we're at a 5 to 10 year cycle. And as far as integrating what work others are doing, we'd have to talk about that. I don't know if we have that figured out yet.
I just wanted to say, though, to add on to that, one useful part of this is it did identify where our data gaps are. So there could be other resources that people could come forward with that could help fill some of those data gaps.
Michael?
Thanks, Dan. I have two broad questions. As you said, this document could and should be useful for guiding decisions. You mentioned planning. I wanted to ask is particularly about parks and open space plans. We've been implementing the Greenways plan for more than a decade now. We may be continuing extending that program. I'm wondering what kind of, how do you see this document might work in guiding particularly our open space acquisition plans, that we're buying trail corridors for that reason? It seems to me it could guide our purchasing decisions for open spaces that would also implement sort of these environmental protection goals as well. So your comments on that?
I think you hit the nail right on the head. It could be useful for those exact things as far as figuring out where we should be purchasing open space and where our restoration opportunities lie for ecological lift. The Greenways Committee, the campaign committee for Greenways 4, asked me to attend and present about what the habitat restoration restoration technical assessment is. And when I did that, they seemed like it was welcome information to them, and it would help guide their planning.
Okay. How do we do that? Do we need to do that more formally? I don't know how to somehow. I want to make sure the right hand knows what the left hand is doing, but how does that work between departments or institutionally? I don't know how that would be done.
Do you want to take that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we continue to work with the Parks Department. Certainly as the comprehensive plan is updated, we can continue to work with Leslie and her staff as they look at incorporating the PRO plan into the comprehensive plan. How do open space acquisition decisions interact with information that we've presented here today? I think that's an ongoing discussion, and we can certainly follow up with Parks on that.
Go ahead.
Thanks. So my second one is very similar but a little bit different. So this is a 150-page technical document, and as you mentioned, it doesn't include shorelines because we already have a near-shore habitat assessment report, and I asked the same question for that. Great, there's a technical document. What does the implementation plan look like? Can we have something like a TIP or like a capital plan we have for, say, sewer and water facilities, where we chart out years in advance what we want to do? So you say there's a prioritized list of actions that actually mentions actual projects. Do we need an implementing document too?
I think the way we've been doing it with these larger scale restoration projects, like we talked about Squalicum phases 1 and 2, is those do go into our capital improvement project list.
Okay.
And I think that's a good way to continue doing it. The document is a technical document saying these are the locations and this is the type of project, but there's still that element of finding the funding for it, which is a whole different adventure, and then making sure it fits with the community goals. And so I don't know if we should take this document and then immediately turn it into an implementation without considering those other two things.
Well, I agree, but I think it'd be useful to have an implementing document, which of course would be informed by this. And for example, transportation projects, we put it on the tip, and that means we're going to try to do it in the near term. We're going to try to find funding for it, and we can actually use that in credibility when we go for funding. Hey, we put it on our list. So implementing document, I don't know, it kind of commits us to looking for funding as well, and we don't know what the time horizon is, but putting it in the document seems pretty useful and important.
Yeah, I think like Renee mentioned, for these types of projects, it really is the budget and the 6-year capital plan adopted in the budget, which is in essence what the TIP is. The TIP is an additional requirement through WSDOT, but it's really taking the city's local capital plan and formalizing it. You're right, this is an excellent document to look at projects like Squalicum Creek that we've been putting in the budget. We certainly have more technical data and make sure that we're doing the right things. And then as we go to try to find the funding to make these projects whole, this is an excellent document that really supports requests for funding from our typical agencies like Ecology, where we request money. So I think what you'll see as we continue to update the capital list for future budgets like the 17-18 biennial budget or the comprehensive plan that's going to have a new 6-year list in it, we'll have projects that have the appropriate backup through this document.
Okay, so you're saying that there are a 6-year capital budget, which is adopted and modified annually with their overall budget. That's the place I should look?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think it might be helpful to Michael to say that if you look at the document, the list of actions, that was maybe a simplified way of saying it. It's not like it ends up with 25 top 10 projects. The range of projects would be huge. So it has the 9 sub-watersheds, then it has forest projects and wetland projects and riverine projects. And so you would need to take that second step to say, okay, what of all of those would you want to look at? So it doesn't narrow down to like a top 10 or a top 20. There would be another drilling down that would need to happen before you came up with a project list.
Okay, great. Any other questions or comments from council or committee members? Okay, Annalise, I wanted to thank you for providing a very comprehensive report. Thank you. Mayor?
Well, just to add on to that, I think the fact that we have a document that others could use that weren't even part of the city, it would give us a chance to do some kind of an educational program or an outreach program that this document exists. So if you have Boy Scout groups or any group that wanted to maybe do a project, they'd know that the city has a kind of blueprint for where the most valuable actions could be taken. And I think that's just up to us to make sure that people know that's available. And then we get the benefit, the lift, as Renee says, not just from what the city's doing, but from what others are doing if it's coordinated with our assessment.
Point well taken. All right, seeing no other questions, end of committee.
Thank you, Dan. At this time, the council will adjourn to an executive sessions. They are closed to the public. There will be a report out in our regular meeting tonight. And then we will return back. We have 2 litigation issues, and we will return in approximately 25 minutes. That should be, well, I guess we're running late. So now about 2:30, we will return for committee of the whole. Thank you.